Corinne Jola is a choreographer and a scientist. She's a lecturer and choreographer based in the UK since 2004. She trained in psychology and dance with masters awarded in choreography with distinction and in psychology. She also holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. Her research topics include a dancer's embodiment of movement notation, brain activity linked to spatial perception and movement observation, and the adaptability of the sensory and motor system in dancers, non-dancers, as well as dance spectators. Her research has been published internationally in book chapters, peer-reviewed journals, and conference proceedings, and her performances and dance installations have been selected at several festivals and conferences in the UK and abroad. The dialogue between science and dance is given a real voice through her comprehensive interdisciplinary approach, and that is evidenced in the workshop that Corinne will be leading on Saturday, co-teaching with Susanna Recchia, which, can you tell us the title of the workshop? It starts at 10 a.m. on Saturday, and it's random body work as scientific encounters.
Yeah. So what we are trying to do is to have practice that she's been doing together with practice in science, so that you can learn or experience how you could ask empirical questions and investigate them in the space, about space.
Great. So please sign up if you're interested by coming to talk with me. And I can also finally say that in Corinne's role as a facilitator for communication between the disciplines, she aims at developing effective understandings of how people interact and communicate with each other. She also has a website which you can go to for more information.
Which is updated.
So thank you very much for being here, Corinne. We have, I need to check the time, but we'll about 45 minutes for the presentation and questions.
Thank you. It's always quite strange to hear your own bio. Okay, but thank you very much for inviting me. It's really nice to be here and experience Malta again on a different side. Last time it was 20 years ago I was here. And yeah, it's very nice, thank you. So today I've kind of put together research that I've been doing for my PhD or later as well. Kind of what I thought would be most interesting for you as contact improvisers. So I'm focusing on touch and proprioception, but also what is currently kind of still trends to do with cognitive neuroscience, which is the neural network. It has been mentioned a little bit this morning. And I'm aware that it is quite a lot, so probably we leave one part that I show you then out, but focus on touch and proprioception, unless you're really still awake. I want to know this and this and this, then we can just go on. Maybe we have to look at it. So as a title, I was also wanted to get something like related to touch. So touch me now, how urgent and how important this is. And we've got to get it right. I was looking for a part in the song for touch me now, where it's not sexualized, because this is something I'm not going to talk about. And it's probably one of the reasons why in psychology and cognitive neuroscience, touch isn't as much researched as other things like vision or proprioception, because it is very close to, very intimate and often sexualized, so researchers don't do that kind of thing. So it's always kind of better to stay on the objective side. And this was one part of the song I felt like, yeah, that would fit. But of course for me, and I'm not going to bore you very long, I just think of Brexit when I hear we've got to get it right. So. But that's all I'm going to say now. Really what I wanted to say with this is when cognitive neuroscience is in contact with dance. So we've got to get it right. When we want to study dance from the cognitive neuroscience point of view, as well as when dancers want to learn or kind of work and collaborate with neuroscientists, we really got to get it right. And there is a lot of research out there that I think didn't get it right. That doesn't mean I do it right all the time, but I'm trying to get there. And you will see while I'm talking through what I mean with getting it right. This is an image I just downloaded from Google, because I think it really, for me, it represents really well how you can have a kinesthetic sensation by just looking at the still. So this isn't even dance, this is a still from somebody falling through sky. But you have like a kinesthetic sense of motion because of the experience of gravity and everything. And to link it to today, and you will see this image back in contact improvisation it's even more. So when you compare the two, it's like just, this is already quite complex. It's just a still, it's not movement, it's just a still image with one body. Here you have two bodies. They touch each other in different places. They're laughing, you can hear the sound by looking at the picture. And you know it's improvised, so it's not clear exactly where it comes from, how it goes, etc. So it's much, much more complex. And that's probably also one of the reasons why there is not so much research, in actual fact very, very little, on contact improvisation in cognitive neuroscience. Because it's improvised, so it's really difficult to define when you want to do studies. It involves touch, which is really often seen as something quite difficult, and dirty, and especially in contact improvisation where you touch, you're very close at times, and you touch each other's body in many, many different places, and then I don't know how you would describe this in a paper. But definitely something to think about for future studies. I'm going to give some background on neural neurons and then talk about the challenges, a bit more in depth about combining, get it right between neurons and neuroscience. Then I want to talk about study examples, touch and proprioception. And this is what I meant, if we have time, I can talk more about some of the studies I did on action observation, which basically means what happens in the spectator's body and brain when they watch dance, like when we were in a circle before, that people can kind of make noises and predictions, etc. But if we don't have time, we leave that out, or I can talk to you individually. And then I summarize and talk about what to put in some future studies, or maybe you have some ideas that you want to discuss. So really the predominant research on neurons in neuroscience is action observation based on the so-called neural system. This was triggered by a coincidental finding of an Italian researcher. Does anyone who has never heard of neuron? So 1, 2, yeah.
Oh, I have heard.
You have heard. So it's something that counts as known nowadays. And initially it wasn't related to dance, it was monkey studies. So they looked at a monkey grasping a piece of food, either themselves or watching an experimenter placing a piece of food. So the coincidental finding was the study itself was looking at the movement neurons of the monkey. So they had invasive measurements, so they measured actually the activity of the neurons in the brain of the monkey when the monkey grasps food. But what they found was, and this is illustrated here, I don't know if you see it, so this is the noise the measurement apparatus makes every time the neuron fires. And here you can see the head of the monkey grasps the food and the neuron is firing. In this case, it was the experimenter who placed a new piece of food like banana or something, and the neuron fires as well. A little bit less, but it still fires, even though the monkey doesn't move. And the researchers actually researched movement. They didn't research action observation when a monkey is passively watching. So this was something they did not predict, they didn't expect, but they noticed this during the experiment, and that has kind of created a lot of research. And these are the areas in the monkey's brain, so this would be the monkey looking in this direction. Brains look a bit different than to humans, but kind of the main form is the same. You have here a frontal area and a parietal area, so in this kind of area and here, that is known for action execution, but these are areas where some of the neurons have been found to also fire when you are just passive, but watching somebody else. When I watch you moving your hand, that neuron, some of these neurons will fire. But it's not that the whole area will fire, it's just some of them. And the experiments with humans that have been done in these so-called scanners, and I don't know if you have been in one of those scanners, it's not very comfortable. Yeah, you've been. It's an enclosed space, it makes a lot of noise, which is the magnetic pulse of the scanner, which is, I think, 2 million times more than the magnetic pulse, the magnetic attraction from the North Pole. So it's very dangerous if you would go in there with metal in your body. You cannot do that because it would immediately attract the magnetic mental neurotic. It's also, so they ask you all kind of security questions and things. Yes?
I was just going to say, there are also different levels.
Yes.
So, I think the highest is 7 Tesla.
Yeah.
That's mostly 9. Do they have 9? Okay. I had 3.
Yeah, so when I started it was 1.5 Tesla. Tesla is the number of the magnetic attraction strength. And now they are up to 14 or 17.
Oh wow.
So it's and what it does, the higher it is, the more kind of detailed you see the brain structure. So because there are so many, when I show these blobs, there are millions of neurons in there, and you make a lot of assumptions in science, like say, okay, mirror neurons are here. Actually, only some of these in that area, and it's not the whole area. So there are a lot of assumptions to come up with a conclusion like this. So you can always be kind of a bit critical and say it's actually very much simplified. But that's the way research works. So and then you have the people in the scanner, and you measure dancers or non-dancers, how their brain is activated while they watch videos of dance, for example. You cannot have them move in the scanner because the head has to be made really still. So the scanner takes pictures, like slices for the brain, and in order for then the computer software to align these to a whole three-dimensional representation of the brain, the scanner needs to know which image goes where and how it is aligned with the image before and after. And if you move your head, not as much as many you could do, but if you even just move it a little bit, or you have a subject who has a cold and needs to sneeze, even though the head is quite fixed, you move a little bit, that's already very difficult then to measure, because you don't know kind of which neuron belongs. So it's very restricted, and it's uncomfortable, and it's noisy. So it's an artificial environment, and most of the time the experiment has like videos of 3 seconds. So you watch dance in snippets of 3 seconds. Then you wonder, well, is that dance, or is that just a movement action? And then there were new technologies where you could analyze the data in different ways and actually show videos of 20 minutes. But you cannot go in there and watch an hour-long performance. Also, the other thing is you're lying like this. So you experience a video. I mean, maybe you notice that sometimes when you now watch movement on the tablets and you're lying in bed and watch them like this, sometimes there's a strange distortion of the space happening, how you think yourself in the other body, which is different to when you're upright. So there are all sorts of elements to be considered. But it was very interesting research, and it has created a lot of findings. So the mirror neurons is the behavior of the mirror neuron mirrors the behavior of the other as through the observer itself directly. So this is what we saw, or what I believe Scott wanted to do in the circle. So when he made noises, his noises were the predictions of the actions of the two people doing contact improvisation. And he was really able to do that very well because he has very physical experience of contact improvisation himself. I would have seen more of a narrative in there, and I would have come up with fight, fright, like relationship-linked words rather than movement. But that was just what I was observing. And that was something that they found also with dancers, so that ballet dancers who are trained in ballet, watch ballet movements in the scanner, they have an enhanced activity in those mirror neuron areas, which are also responsible for moving. So they watch a movement of somebody else as if they self would be moving, and their prediction of movement is one of the elements that's in there. But they don't have less activity when they watch, for example, capoeira dance, which is something they're not trained in. So the physical entrainment of a movement influences what the brain does when you passively watch somebody else move. But we also did some research where we showed that visual experience. So if you have a dance audience who cannot go through the experience of that particular type of movement that you stage, they still, if they go and watch dance a lot, a particular style of dance, they gain visual experience, which also helps them to kind of incorporate what they see on stage. Slightly differently, but it's also possible. So in humans, it's also mostly 3 areas. ventropremotor, so you can see it looks a bit similar than the monkey brain, but this is also simplified. So you have an area frontal, and then you have an area parietal, and then you have here all sorts of areas which are important, especially the superior temporal sulcus for combining audio, visual, tactile senses, all these senses. And that area is also really important for the body image, to kind of, when you see another body, this area will be mostly involved. And when I talk about specific areas, it doesn't mean the rest of the brain is there. It's like there's activity all the time, everywhere. It's just when you compare different tasks, or if you show a participant 100 images of bodies and 100 images of faces, and you compare the brain activity over these 200 images, for the bodies you would see more activity here. But if you just look at the brain activity during one image, you couldn't tell what the participant was looking at, because the whole brain is active all the time. And for the monkeys, in the early studies, they found what is important is an interaction between a biological effect, or like the hand, or the foot, or the mouth, and an object, most often food. And then the interest really was, well, in dance, this is not necessarily given. You have dancers moving on stage without objects, and still people enjoy it. So there seems to be some kind of kinesthetic response to what people see on stage. And that kind of instigated the researchers to say, well, let's look what happens with humans when they watch dance, when there is no object, and whether we also have neural neurons kind of firing up when we watch dance without objects. So that was kind of the idea of doing all that research. For monkeys, in the early days, they thought, well, who is the actor? So which experiment places the food, whether it's a female or a male, whether it's an experiment that is small or tall, they like or they don't like, doesn't really matter. And also whether you see the goal or the object or the reward, it doesn't matter. That's what they thought in the early days. But you know, as dancers, for the audience, all these things matter. It matters who is the dancer. It matters how the dancer's presence affects the spectator. These are very often more crucial than the action itself. Whether it's like an action like this or something like that. It depends on how it is performed. What is the initiation of the movement, rather than just what movement it is. Yeah?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You know, when you speak about interaction between a biological effect or an object, but for example, food to floor is not considered, I mean, we're always in relation
To the floor. Yeah, no, the floor would be considered an object.
More like
something that can be moved. Yeah, so when you talk about object from a scientific point of view, it is something that you can grasp and yeah. So I already kind of emphasized this, so there's really this current trend in cognitive neuroscience to employ dance in the study of the human brain and behavior. And when I started doing it, some of my supervisors were like, well, we've done it now for a couple of years, so now you should find another tool. Yeah, well, it's kind of now there are a few papers out really dancing. Like, no one will be interested in a few this time. But it's really the opposite that happens. There are more and more people who have a background in dance and are interested in neuroscience and or switch fields from one to the other, and it's a really thriving area. Especially if there's a switch between the two. And the focus most often is on motor learning, action observation, and aesthetic perception. You might notice touch, I didn't mention that. So touch and dance is not something that is a focus at the moment. And there are really only a handful of studies that look at touch and social dances, or I think Parkinson and improvisation, or perfect improvisation. But you find most in action observations on learning. So if you're interested in it, there is possibilities to find people who probably would like to collaborate. Also, there are different viewpoints. One is from Emily Cross, who has a lot of research in dance and action observation. In her paper, she writes with Luca Ticini, exploration of the neural mechanisms associated with art appreciation, such as biological reasoning, by certain works or performances are more popular than others, is undoubtedly of considerable artistic and commercial value. And I'm pleased to hear a lot of things, I don't have to say much more. It's also contrasted to an artist researcher who says it is critical that future studies in the neuroaesthetic domain, and neuroaesthetic is kind of cognitive neuroscience and perception and experience of aesthetic art, aesthetic objects. Domain should make clear what precisely neuroscientific data add to the study of aesthetics that behavioral experiments alone cannot achieve. So really very often there is a trend to do a neuroscientific study, whether it actually adds to the research question or not. This is interesting if you find something that you could say, well, I can propose now that maybe doing it this way, I can explain why the audience responds in that way. But you cannot kind of create a recipe that you can give to someone who has no experience in creating artwork. Just by following the recipe, they could create something that the audience would like. That's just not possible. So that's a very kind of simplified view, and also a bit dangerous. And dangerous because cognitive neuroscience and science has more access to money. It costs more as well. So fMRI studies are quite expensive. But it's also in most societies it has more power. And then to say that neuroscience can create and define what is art and what is aesthetic experience is not a good route to go down. There is also a study which I quite like to cite by Westberg, which looked at giving people papers that had images of brains with all the colors. So, for example, some like this. And even though this image of the brain doesn't add anything to the findings that were explained in the paper, people were asked to value the paper, how good the paper it is, how good the results are, how important it is. And it is much more important than a picture of a dancer. Even though it doesn't add anything, it's just a brain in there. So people, as soon as they can see, there's something happening in the brain, wow, something you cannot see from the outside, that's really impressive. And it is. It's amazing that you can put people in a scanner and see after a long class of computational events, you can see how their brain looks like, and you can see where there's more or less activity. It's amazing. But it doesn't always add to your question or to the interpretation. Sometimes going into a studio, have an experience, describe that experience, doing qualitative work is of more value than a break, if it's not needed to say something. So there are these challenges from coming from different levels, different approaches, different questions, ideas. Very often there are clear distinctions between art projects and scientific research. There are, and if you really want to combine it, it's a challenge because of different reasons. One of them is scientists make assumptions on dance that often differ from dancers and dance scholars. So of the assumptions and knowledge that dancers and dance scholars have. And it needs a lot of coming together and discussing those assumptions in order to take a step forward. Artists use science loosely to create artworks, which is fine if it's clear why. But if you want to make a scientific statement, then you have to be a bit more careful. So, and what about the audiences? How do they respond to the different sides? I've worked with neuroscientists who go and see a lot of ballet and enjoy ballet a lot. But it was for me never possible to, maybe it's actually, but it was never possible to kind of really get a feeling, a sense for they are really combining what they see in the Royal Ballet to what the research they do with ballet in the lab. For me, it was always kind of, no, it's disjoint. They go and enjoy ballet, and they go and they do the research, but there's no attempt to really link the two and see what happens then. Ideally, if you can combine the two, it has a lot of impact. You can reach out to a wider audience in either way, in science, when you incorporate it in the artwork, and in dance, you have a wider audience, as well as in dance, if you go into science. It's good for rehabilitation and well-being programs. We heard this morning really some exciting steps forward to kind of give the experience of contact improvisation also to other students who would normally not do it. It would lead hopefully to a softening of the discipline cultures, which is kind of the underlying cause, as well as paradigm shifts in the science. There's been a particular way of doing research for over 50, 60 years, doing experiments in a lab, having a participant pressing buttons as responders. And the experiment often has to be really reductionistic. So if I'm interested in, this is a rather simple example. If you remember the picture I had from Charlie with the woman on top, if you do an experiment and you're looking at kinesthetic responses, that's far too complex because there's so much happening in that picture that in the end you cannot really pinpoint it. It's because of this. It's because of how they interact with each other or have the weight or the direction of movement. It's far too complex. Very often they would have been reduced to stick figures, because what you also see, it's a male and a female, and that influences the responses. So research will use stick figures. Also the clothing gives information on the background and where they are, etc. So research has reduced stimuli a lot, in able to find clear data. But then you can really ask yourself, how much then does this really tell about the findings and about the real world, and how you can kind of transfer the findings from the lab to the This I put here because when we started the research with real dancers, so we went into a theatre testing audiences' responses, brain responses while they were Sleeping Beauty. So you woke now everyone up, thank you. You might be. And when we did that, it was very clear when we try and publish that data, it's just far too chaotic for any reviewer to kind of understand that even though there's lots of things that we couldn't control, there's still one main aspect that we looked into, and it's about publishing. And it took us about 3 or 4 years for the first paper who looked at real dance performance in a theatre space and how people respond to that to be accepted for publication. Once the first one was out, then the next one was much easier, and the next one was much easier. And similar things happened also in visual research, that now they use more real-life pictures from kind of real cities, etc., rather than just lab-created images. So there's a trend now for what they call paradigm shifts, so that the research changes. And this is, they asked me for an interview in the British Neuroscience Association Malta, where they talked about my research, and I was like, wow, so now it's kind of accepted that you can do these kind of crazy things. So that was really nice. And when I try and explain how dance and neuroscience could come together, I first probably came up with the idea of experimental choreography. And with experimental choreography, I don't mean like experimental work the way it's already known in dance. More experiments related to really how science does experiments. And whether there's a way to create an artistic work that at the same time can stand as an experiment, so it doesn't violate too much the scientific approach and way of getting data, quantifying data. So that in the end, performances can be of artistic and scientific value. That's kind of something I like to work towards. But then later on I realized that on the other hand, embodied neuroscience, and nowadays everything is called embodied. Embodied language, embodied this. What I meant with this was kind of that the neuroscientists, when they study dance, they should go at least once in a studio. Or they should at least go and see performances and reflect on them. So there's no point in doing research on something, especially if it's related to dance, when you have never experienced it. Because you're completely dissociated from the aspects that are involved when you study dance. Like for example, the 3 seconds video clip. For a researcher, it didn't matter. Yeah, it's 3 seconds, it's dance. It's like, no, it's not dance. You wouldn't pay to go and see 3 seconds. This connection between science and art has been much more successful in the visual arts. Years back, Leonardo da Vinci is a typical example, and what I thought was interesting was a statement saying that if he would have published in a way that researchers publish now, his drawings back then, he would have changed the course of science. But nowadays as well, there are many art science and visual arts projects, art science projects, and I think very often when I go and watch them or read about them, for me it has a feeling it works, which I don't have so often in dance. So there's something with visual art that works much better, and one of the things is very often it's still dance is emergent, ephemeral. Thank you. Ephemeral. So you cannot grasp it. You watch it and then it's gone, or it's just resonating with you. But there's nothing out there that you can kind of take with you and pinpoint to it. So it's much more challenging. And this is also why I try to kind of link all these different all these challenges that come out. Just to one I mentioned, like output forms in cognitive neuroscience as well. You have to have something in your hand in the end. So you have a peer review, which means like other experts read it and criticize it and say that it's good or not good enough for publication. And targeted audiences, which are expert scientists, read it. In dance, for example, many people try to aim for idiosyncratic performances, so every performance is something new or experience new at least. And it is for all kind of audiences. You don't want to have just dancers and audience. You want to have all sorts of people, and you want people who normally don't go and experience dance. You want them also to experience dance. I can hand it out as well if you want to read all the different details. So it's happening not very often that scientists dance. This was from a project where I started in Glasgow. The professor, myself doing the research, and the performers kind of having a little bit of fun after the testing. This was where we kind of tried to keep the performances as close as possible to real life. So we had the performers wear their proper costumes, and they were performing for 6 minutes, and the audiences were watching live while we were testing them. And on the other hand, you have dancers from Indio Greco, CPC in Amsterdam, a company I've been collaborating with for about 10 years, from 2006 on. And you see that dancers kind of thinking and reflecting on different movements, kind of whether they have, whether there are some elements in their movements that are so-called pre-choreographic elements, which come up again and again and again. But they had this task set from the choreographer themselves to sit down and reflect on a movement repertoire and help them doing the research on what are the elements that are in the material. But you see, it's existing much more on this side. So you as well, you take notes after a class of contact improvisation, then that you see scientists dancing. It's much better. And again, just some kind of what I call hard problems and soft problems. When you collaborate between dance and science, you have issues of language, types of knowledge, discipline, cultures, different kind of understanding in dance. And if you have enough time and funding to work together, you can sort this out in some ways. And if you have people who are really keen to collaborate. But other things you cannot really change so quickly. So the ranking of science versus dance, kind of which field has more power or is given more power, more funding, different methodologies to do research and ask questions as well, and the dissemination, which is the publication, how you get the product that you did out to the public. And when you look at understanding of dance, well, rather than just say what understanding of dance is a really broad term, as you know, like what kind of dance is important. And here it comes again. There are so many different types of dance. There are so many different types of understanding. But in science you have like one particular way of doing things, whether you study faces, whether you study communication, whether you study perception. There are so-called rules, kind of scientific paradigms, how you do things. But in dance it's very different. And this one is the one that's been studied most from Cognitive Neuroscience, I think. Not contact improvisation. And there are different reasons why. So I will talk now about some research, some specific examples of research from touch and proprioception. And particularly the one from touch, there is maybe not even a difference. And we've heard about all these different types of touch this morning. But touch in relation to dance, there is not really anything. I don't know if you found something specific. But touch is really important. It is mentioned as the most important member of the somatosensory system. Somatosensory system is what you need to move and experience movement, predict movements, all the senses and the motor system. And it is seen as the most intimate of all senses. And I just thought that was a nice example of combining how it was and how it's nowadays. So it is important. And just we can do some examples. One element is about the sensation. If you have somebody sitting next to you, you can put your arm out, one of you, and the other person try and with the finger, kind of as if it was an object, try to experience the hand, the arm and the hand, what is it, what kind of object is it? And now, instead of trying to find out what this thing is of the other person, try with your own, with the passive arm from the other person to figure out your hand. What is your hand?
The same person?
Yes.
Who was doing it actively?
Yeah.
So we're not doing it, we're feeling it back. Or are we doing it?
So before you try to kind of see what is it, and now you want to find out about your own hand. What is it?
Okay, so I so what is the feel? Yeah, first I went down here. Yeah. Concentrating on your own.
Yes.
And then you can swap around the walls. So you can do both. You can explore with touch an object, but you can also explore your own body with the object. In this case, it wasn't an object, it was an octopus. And it feels very different. Yeah? But it even feels very different for the person who was actually passive. But it was a touch. In both cases, it's touch, but it's something very different. But this is this two-sided view. So did you feel some?
You can also use the other person's hand to just bring sensation to it.
Yes, exactly.
For instance. Just the shift. This is like Lisa Nelson's research.
Using the other body to get.
Well, both those kinds of shifts
Yeah.
in perception.
Yeah.
J.J. Dixon kind of things as well.
Yeah.
If, this may be a silly question, if you were to physically reproduce an arm,
Yeah.
you know, with something that feels like skin and, you know, anyway,
Yeah.
birthmarks, etc. How much of a neural difference would, you know, even if you made it feel like flesh,
Yeah.
would the person trying to explore their own hand or the hand of the
Of the
robot?
other.
Yes. How different would that perception be if they were, say, blindfolded?
There is a study that I'm going to talk about that you might find interesting. It really depends on the surrounding.
Yeah.
So if you see the other person, well, if you see a person but a robotic arm, or how well you really focus on the one task or the other.
Yeah.
And in normal life, it's always mixed. When you don't put attention and you just grab something, you always have both signals, but you can put your attention either of exploring the object or exploring your own arm.
Right.
Yeah. But it's present both at the same time, normally. So that's called double sensation. It's very specific for touch. Yeah?
So can I interrupt? When you said first exploring her hand,
Yeah.
and then I tried to do my hand.
Yeah.
That was the two. But in the second one, I was still touching, but the actual movement of touching was different.
Yes.
It wasn't just the experiencing
Yeah.
of the movement,
Yeah.
but what I was doing was
Yes.
different.
You use a different tactic.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder how it would be if I did the same movement, but my intention would be one and then the
Yeah.
other. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're thinking in scientific terms.
Okay.
So that would be a way of how you could then ask a scientific question. Say, I'm really interested in this difference.
The challenge is like touching, it's sort of like explore something, it also has to do with grabbing, like this way, but actually from within the company, like we can explore the texture of the hand.
Sure. Yeah, but you actually move
Oh, it's
differently.
Dixon.
Yeah.
So the one thing that's really important in there as well is the exploring with touch, with kind of feeling also the texture thing, how warm it is, so that the sense of warmth is also part of the tactile sense, how sharp it is. And you mostly do that with fingers, because as we saw in one of the pictures this morning, that was from yours, wasn't it? So it's the most part of the tactile sensation and representation of the cortex is for the hands and the limbs, where you have like the highest resolution, so you're very sensitive of feeling things with the fingers. But when you kind of try and sense your own shape, movement plays a really important part in that. So touch and movement is again something that completely changes the experience of your own body representation. And this double sensation is very, very specific for touch. In vision, you might be able to imagine something and to see things. So you might have also something similar, but the imagination is never as substantial as both sides in the touch. Yeah, so this double sensation is very specific for the tactile sense. And also something that's quite interesting, but a bit less specific, is that you have plasticity. So things in the brain can change. If one thing doesn't work and you have to get better at another one, so you can show that the brain actually changes. For example, in sight impaired people, the tactile spatial acuity is enhanced which indicates cortical plasticity, which they found when they put people in the scanner who were sight impaired and had to touch things, they had kind of more acuity and more activity in visual areas, even though they cannot see, for example. Yeah, so they can substitute, to a certain extent, one sense for another. And so, if you want to study touch scientifically, what's often happening is you apply touch on the skin in a specific manner, depending on how the experiment is designed, and you ask for participants for the experience, unless you do a neuroscientific study where you would have to do the scanner. One example which I indicated before is what's done a lot of research on is the so-called rubber hand illusion. Where is the situation? This is the experimenter and this is the participant. And you might not see this, but there is a visual occlusion thing. So the right hand is on the table and this hand here is actually a rubber hand. So it's an artificial hand which is not attached to the participant. The participant hand is on the other side of the occlusion. And the experimenter touches the participant hands, and at the same time, in the same synchrony, this kind of artificial hand, which the participant sees. So there is kind of an occlusion. I don't see my own hand as a participant, I see an artificial hand. I can feel the touch, and I see the touch. Another illustration. From the participant's point of view, so here is where the touch is being felt, the strokes. And this is where the touch is being seen. So what happens for most people after a while is this rubber hand, the artificial hand, is incorporated. So the participant starts to think that this is their hand.
There's even, I just saw another example of this with Daniel Seth, who's got the Sackler Centre for Consciousness Studies in Sussex. He's doing one where he's projecting the image of the hand, and he actually makes the whole arm like grow and shrink, and you even have, it even goes as far as having the sensation of your arm growing and shrinking.
And they also did experiments with the whole body.
Oh, yeah.
So I have an image imposed in front of you, and then you see the body being stroked while you're being stroked as well, so you have like a spatial dislocation experience. So this is an example of how the brain tries to make sense of what's happening. Because you see something happening there that you can also feel. So you kind of incorporate them, kind of match the two, and this leads to this phenomenal experience of the artificial hand is yours, when it's actually not. And I did a study where I had people having their hands in a cardboard box, and on top of the box were different positions located, like where the wrist would be, and then like different target locations. And what I would do as an experimenter here from the side, there was another hole, and I would kind of touch the participant in different locations. What the participant had to do is either visually or by pointing, indicating on top of the box where they think they have been touched. What other researchers previously found is that there's a tendency to locate things towards joints. So joints are kind of attractors. If I touch here, I feel it's closer to the joint as it actually is. Or here, I would kind of think it's closer to the shoulder joints than it actually is. And we just did that by looking at when the participant had to indicate the number on top of the box where they think they have been touched, or point, and I will measure it out. And this is what I found. So the dark dots are really the actual location where it's been touched. So the touch location on the wrist plus 1, 2, 3, and 4 centimeters, or minus 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is kind of the error that would be linear, that would be expected if there is no mistake made. In the grey ones here are when they had to point towards the location, and the dark ones are when they had to visually indicate. And what you can see in both cases, the error, so the distance from the body, is less. So this means if I would have touched them here on the wrist, they actually thought they've been touched. I exaggerate. They think they have been touched closer to the body than they actually were. in all of the locations. So independent whether it's above the wrist or below the wrist, all the touches have been guessed to have happened closer to the body center than it was the case. Also whether they had to indicate by moving or indicate with the eyes where they think they have been touched. So touch is where you can be close to the center of the experience. But there were 3 subjects which it was very strongly different. And this would be where if they made no mistakes in the judgment, the dog dots, and the white one is where they said. So these 3 subjects here, just 2 as an example, they thought they've been touched further away than they actually have. And that was really strange, because there is variability between people, but not if the result is so clear, like people kind of think they've been touched closer to the center. These 3 participants thought they were touched further away. If I remember correctly, I think at least 2 out of those 3 were made. So it's like, okay, I need to have them come back and see what happened. Maybe I did a mistake or whatever. And what I noticed is, when talking to them, I said, well, actually, I touched the end of the box. So I made a stupid mistake as an experiment. I didn't realize that their hands were so long that I was touching the end of the box. So I asked them to come back, and I removed the end of the box to see whether that might have affected the results. Yes, when they did it again, without being touched on top of where I touched them, have an indicator of the end of the box. They also showed they experienced closer to the body. So, and this has actually been shown that when you constantly write with a pen, your body expands into the pen. So basically, if you have touch at the end of your limbs, you experience your body longer than it actually is. So you would sense the touch right away. But if you're not having that close to you, yeah?
Yeah, I want to add, because I don't know if you know it, I do it with my children a lot, this game, where they have to close their eyes, and you walk with your fingers, and they have to guess when you're here.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting too, because, well, in this case, it's always that they're too low, so they stop too early before they feel the point of this. And it's a game I really like to play with my children, when they're arriving at this point of touch.
Because you kind of have continuous touch. Then it's a mixture between what your representation, you're not very aware of all the different points you have on your body. Because your rarely are so slow and continuous, so you don't want, it's not possible that my arm is so long, so you must be there already. There's one of the things.
In each different section, were they removing their hand?
No.
So you were opening the lid and then they were pointing?
No, the lid was always there. So there might have been a shift over time. But the lid was always there, so they didn't see their hand for the whole experiment. And I just touched them, then they had to indicate or say it, and then I waited a little bit and touched them again. So that's quite interesting when you think of the body representation or how the body is experiencing contact and polarization. So first, touch is experienced closer to the body than where it actually is applied, at least in this particular study that I did. And there was almost an inverse attraction, which I didn't point out clearly. But the further away, the closer it is experienced. So that it was not linear, it was really the further away, the bigger is the shift or the error. But also there is like something like what we call the peripheral drift. The touch location is shifted with additional touch. So like if there is an extended body to your own body. So, and this is something that has actually been mentioned yesterday. And some of you might also have experienced it, that when you walk in contact, move in contact with another body, and sometimes when you close your eyes, you can almost feel the extension of the other body as part of your body. Yeah?
Should we move towards the conclusion?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of, because you know a lot about proprioception. This is just a study where we looked at whether dancers are better than non-dancers in the proprioceptive sense. Normally, vision is the best.
Oh, this is amazing.
Try and do it. Oh, I'm not so good anymore. Yeah. So what you're using here is just a proprioceptive sense. The sense of your tendons, muscles, and joint receptors to feel where in space one arm is to match it with the others without vision. But vision normally is much more accurate. So you're much better looking at something and then pointing towards it than kind of having the proprioceptive information and pointing towards it. But what we found with dancers, and I'm not showing you all the data, dance, like I can show you.
You do, especially that.
So, the higher the number, the bigger is the error. And dancers were sitting on a table and non-dancers. And they had to put their arm underneath the table, which we kind of took the camera of how far they were away, so how big is the mistake. And vision and proprioception together, so if you have both, that's always the best end result. So the more sensory systems you can use to solve a problem, the better. But vision also has like the least errors, so vision is quite good. But when you look at proprioception only, so when you don't have visual information, the dancers are better than the non-dancers. So if you have a trained proprioceptive sense, and these were ballet dancers who were training at some contemporary. This is just a pattern of errors. So I'm going through this very quickly. This is when you have proprioception. And so you think the arm is closer to your shoulder as well or further away. But you have like this pattern of crossover when you only have proprioception, when you have vision and proprioception. So this is something that comes from proprioception, that kind of link to your own body. But here you have a complete different response between dancers and non-dancers for vision. When you have vision, and you can use vision, and vision is more accurate in general than proprioception, the dancers still show a crossover in the estimation where they think the point is, or where they have their hand. Meaning that even though they have vision, they imagine the proprioceptive location of that point in space. So dancers seem to use proprioception, even though vision is more accurate. So you create kind of a proprioceptive image of the situation. Yeah? So when I look at that dot, as in our experiment as a dancer, I would not just use vision and point to it. I would actually imagine how it feels like having my other arm there, and then match my imagined other arm there.
So when you said dancers, are these dancers also ballet dancers?
Ballet and contemporary, yeah. Because it was this kind of movement that we looked at. Yeah. And I probably explained this far too quickly. But as an idea of taking out the pattern of errors in the estimate of locations, shows or indicates that dancers make a proprioceptive imagination of their body in space, which helps if you don't have vision. But if you have vision, it kind of increases the errors, but it helps you for the sensation. Yeah? So this is just a summary of these proprioceptive events. Vision is more accurate than proprioception. Dancers have more accurate proprioceptive perception. You're trained in this, and so much so that you create a mental image in proprioception, even though it might not help you. It's really accurate. And that's all what I wanted to say to touch on proprioception. If you want to hear more about neuroscientific studies, I can do that. I knew there won't be time, so I just wanted to keep it in there in case. Just very quickly, summary and outlook. So I was talking to you about the differences between neuroscience and dance, and what is important in dance, like presence, liveness, complexity, touch. But these are so kind of messy and have not been thought of being relevant based on the monkey studies and based on the other studies. And it's really difficult to measure the presence and liveness and do an experiment including them. This is what I just said, and kind of as I remember again, the more the scientist goes into the studio, they become more aware of what dancers do. And like the experienced dancers go through and how complex the stimuli needs to be in order to speak to dancers or in order to be considered dance. But that's not done very often. So at the moment I work more with interactive technology with this kind of hope that this would help me then to create a performance that is at the same time an experiment. So that during the performance we actually measure the dancer's heart rate and respiration, and the dancer uses this to create certain projections and things on stage, and that we actually collect data while the dancer is performing as an idea. Or to use interactive technology to make people move more, so they move in front of the live camera and have distortions like you can buy these video games, and that it's an aesthetic experience, so people suddenly start to explore what happens when I move my body in certain ways. And the people who like it a lot are kids. They like to press button and play and figure things out, or dancers, but we really wanted to target the sedentary adult. And to be more kind of diplomatic, I thought I also use a picture of Scott. Similar. So you could question how could you do future studies using contact improvisation. What I kind of emphasized, or hope it was clear, that you can experience the body as expanded through touch, use proprioceptive imagery in contact improvisation, but also contact improvisation, as you know, it is really messy. And it's really kind of social and communicative constructs that would be really interesting to know more about. But if you give such an image to a researcher, well, there's too much happening. What can I do with that? But yeah, if you have ideas, please talk to me. Or questions. So
rich presentation of information and projects and ideas.
I could speak another.
Brilliant. I mean, we do have a cancellation this afternoon, so we have, I would say, another few more minutes for questions, comments.
Just touching on what you were talking about with the pen phenomena.
Yeah.
I'm an Aikido teacher and practitioner.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of weapons training, and there's a phenomena with a knife. If I hold a knife with a very loose grip, somebody can remove it from my hand quite easily. But if I hold the knife with exactly the same loose grip, but we do something in Aikido that we call extending our minds.
Yeah.
If I extend my mind through the end of the tip of the knife,
yeah.
You can't take the knife out of my hand, even though physically nothing's changed with the grip of my... So it's almost like the knife becomes part of me and you can't remove it.
But is it also because you would have the instant reflex of grasping it?
It's the same grip.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. The other thing is if you try and take a knife out of somebody's hand, if I think of removing the knife from somebody's hand, it almost stimulates their grip response. But if I think of removing the person from the knife, it's very easy. We're done. I don't understand it, but that's the way it works.
Sorry, I'm speaking up out of turn, but it reminds me of the experimentation with the hand that we did and how drastically our perception changes according to our thought process. Our perception and touch changes according to what questions we're asking.
But that was before I was here, or when?
No, the hand experiment that you led.
You just did.
That one, yeah.
Where you experience your own hand against the surface of another hand after you've experienced the first hand using your. I mean, that would be an interesting thing to map somehow what the cognitive process is of that. Again, the same action but a different focus, different attention.
Yeah.
Like Lucia's class was taking us through these different levels of attention, even though we were doing very similar activities throughout.
But it reminds me of what she said in her talk. If you make a decision, it was the right decision. What you did rather than worrying about, was this the right decision? Well, yes, it was, otherwise you wouldn't have taken it. You're expert in touching objects from being very little. You kind of touch objects and grasp and try to experience shape and form and texture, etc. So we know how to do that to get the optimal result. Similarly, we somehow have experienced how we can best try and use an object to experience your own bodily form. So you have very different activities in there. So in the one, like you move more, so that active movement influences how you process touch. But if you then would do an experiment like one you kind of proposed, you can still try and focus on experience the object with the same activity, but it's much more difficult. So you would perform worse. If I have to judge how this cup looks like, I perform much worse having never seen it, but kind of trying to do it this way than trying to do it that way. Do you know what I mean?
With the arm instead of the hand?
Yes, so you can...
Because then you have the less information.
Yes. This is much more optimal to kind of try and find out about the shape, and so I can touch it and then I can draw it. Fine.
Or even the back of the hand would be more difficult.
Yes. Well, it's already more difficult. Yeah. But you can use the other one as well, but you would perform worse. So you always use a specific type of activity to best do the thing you want to do. And then if you want to compare the two scientifically, it's very difficult. Like with when you say metric, like what you problem in brain activity, because it's a very different action to do it this way than to do it this way. So you have loads of differences in brain activity because they're quite different. So you would really have to again and simplify and say, okay, this task and compare. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have Griffith, and then Joe, and then Brad.
Can I ask a question? Sorry if I misremembered, but you've been talking about MRIs, and I was wondering if you used fMRIs as well.
Yes.
And-
No, I mean fMRI when I said.
Okay, right.
Yes.
Because I was thinking, in as much as you're watching a whole performance or whatever, the time series of senses and how the brain activity over that time.
Yeah.
Whereas an MRI is a shot of one structure at a point in time. You can get, my dim understanding, I'm not an expert in these fields, but you can get higher resolution on an MRI than you can on an fMRI. And I was just asking what that kind of data is like in terms of how you're understanding that. How many participants do you need for these studies?
So many questions. So for general understanding, fMRI, the F stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging, and MRI is just a magnetic resonance imaging. It's the same machine, it's a different type of setup. And when you want to know brain activity over time, you do a functional scan. So you measure how the brain changes over time. But in fact, the machine scans normally depends on how, whether it's a 7 Tesla or 14 Tesla, what kind of machine it is. Normally, the way it's set up, it takes about 2.4 seconds to have a whole scan of the brain. So you know that in 2.4 seconds, a lot is happening. So if you watch dance and you have like a video of 20 minutes, and then to indicate what happens in a particular position, like 36 seconds into the dance, you cannot locate 36 seconds into the brain because you only have a resolution of 2.4 seconds. So it's already a bit kind of low resolution there as well. And when for every functional scan, you cannot just measure the brain in a functional way. So what happens in the brain when you watch 20 minutes of dance? What researchers do is they impose those data over a scan that is not functional, but that's just kind of, you lie in the scanner or really still do nothing, or you can watch videos, doesn't matter, but it does different types of scans. It doesn't look at activity of the brain, but it looks at the anatomy of the brain, so at the different cell types, brain, white matter. And normally researchers, when you see an image somewhere, it's one type of image imposed over another. So here, for example, this is more like how it looks, just a functional scan. So you cannot really see much. You see the outline of the brain, and you see in red indicated where there's more activity, but it's kind of really, it's not sharp. You know, it's the occipital cortex here where vision is processed, and then you have some frontal areas here, but it's very kind of unsharp, so you cannot really make very, very clear predictions. As soon here you have it a little bit more, you can see some grey and white stripes from the cerebellum, you see a bit more structure here, but this is still a functional scan. Here is as well, that's the new trend, they overlay different functional scans, but you can already see this is a brain kind of shown with slices from top to bottom. You can already see a little bit of the structure. And to do so, to locate more clearly where the activity is enhanced, they overlay one data type on top of the other. For the question of how many number of participants you need, there's a lot of discussion on that. With the way data is analyzed in research is, if I'm interested in one particular aspect, what could I say? I do a personality test or something which would divide you into groups, extroverts and introverts. And if the way I'm testing is not very clear or not very good measurements, even if I take like 1,000 participants, I will find something, maybe not introvert versus extrovert, but I wanted to show, but I will find something else that divides you as a group that is significant. So if you have enough participants, you will find something. Or it's not a good approach. So most researchers say, as soon as you have enough participants to find the difference you were interested in, you have enough. So even if it's just 6 participants. But not everyone agrees on that. So there's a lot of discussion.
Take one last comment from Brandon.
I was just wondering how your work and your critique is received by your colleagues in neuroscience, because you published sort of against some of their findings.
Yeah.
Do they respond, or?
Because I say it again.
Because you published criticism of neuroaesthetics, that's what the feminist work and others. Do they respond, or do you? How is this sort of criticism received within the scientific community?
I'm always a bit scared. So also, for example, as soon as I finish my talk and I know there's a recording of me criticizing researchers, I'm like, oh, I hope I didn't say anything wrong. But I'm surprised, well, at least not openly. There's no open kind of, why did you say this about my work? That's not true.
Is it transforming the way they're doing research at all? Or do they say, I should have helped that answer, or I should put the work?
No. So maybe there should be more negative response, because also there is not so much positive response either. And I feel that at the moment, so at the beginning it was really hard to convince the reviewers that what we do is scientific enough to be published. And I was quite kind of relieved when it finally happened, because without publications you won't get another job. That's just how it is nowadays. So that was fine, but now I feel like I go into such a different direction than the colleagues I originally started with, like Emily Cross, that I mentioned. She's really doing kind of neuroscientific research on dance the way neuroscientific research is done. Although she also has a background in dance, but her heart seems to be lying more in the neuroscience than in the dance bit, so that's how I can tell. And she just goes off in a very different direction to what my research is heading to. And I realized that rather than trying to kind of put my foot down and say, yeah, it should be done like this and it should be done like that, it's going so far away that it's really almost not comparable anymore. And it's good if both sides coexist. So, for example, her research, when you mentioned her, is more basic research, the way research is done, and my research is more applied. And it's going into so far away from each other that you cannot kind of almost criticize one with the other, because it becomes something different. Yeah. And I think that's probably a better place to be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.